we have a serious age demographic challenge in government today. So about 7% of the federal workforce is under the age of 30 today. And if you look outside the federal workforce at the broad US workforce, that number is about 22, 23%. So you factor that in, you're like, okay, by a factor of 3 to 1, basically, we are under indexed in terms of early career people, is the euphemism at least we're using instead of saying under 30. On the other end, we have, a lot of people who are kind of close to retirement age. So about 44% of our workforce is over the age of 50. And so you can imagine if we do nothing else, just over the next 5, 10, 15 years, you've got an enormous bolus of people who will be retiring, understandably, from the federal government. And we're doing nothing to kind of, replace, that pipeline on the front end. Now, you and I are probably both simpatico in the sense that we both would like smaller government, but I think we need something other than no government. And so we are, potentially at risk of being in a situation where we actually may not even have the right number of people to even service the American people on the things that we all think are important, to be part of government.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Nick Solheim, and I'm the CEO of American Moment, and I'm very glad to have you back with us for another fantastic episode this week. Today, we have the privilege of having the great Scott Kupor, who is the director of the Office of Personnel Management, on the show to talk about all of the exciting things going on at OPM. That includes their new Tech Force initiative, what they're doing to recruit young people to work in career roles in government, and whether or not you need a college degree to work in the government anymore. So this was a fantastic episode. We've been a huge fan of everything that Scott has been doing as director of OPM. He also tells some really cool stories about his time with some of the members of the cabinet and his interview with the president for this job and all of that stuff. So it was a fantastic episode. We're very grateful to him and his team for making it work. And we are going to give you a little bit of insight to the secrets of the inner workings at OPM. So we will now go to OPM Director Scott Kupor. Scott, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me here. I'm glad to be here.
This is a super exciting interview for us. We've been doing a lot of work with OPM over the last couple of months, and I'm very glad to finally have the opportunity to meet you. Before we get into everything exciting that's going on at OPM right now, you have a bit of a non-traditional background for being the director of OPM. Tell us about it. How did you end up here?
I ended up here, actually, the simple answer is I ended up here because I made one smart decision in my life about 30 years ago. So let me see if I can unpack that for you and your listeners. So my background is I grew up in Texas. I went out to West for school. I went to school at Stanford and thought I was going to be a lawyer. So I actually went to law school. And about halfway through law school, I realized I didn't want to practice law, which was did not make my parents very happy, as you can imagine.
That happens to a lot of people.
It does happen to a lot of people. But, I come from a generation, I'm a little bit older than you are. So I come from a generation where, for my parents, if you weren't a doctor, an accountant, or a lawyer, basically you didn't have a real job. And so I had a little explaining to do when I decided I wanted to do that. And for me, first luck of draw in my life was I happened to graduate law school in 1996. And your listeners may or may not remember this, but this was right at the start of what turned out to be the .com boom in Silicon Valley. So a company that nobody knows about anymore called Netscape goes public in 1995. And it's the first time where tech is really in the public zeitgeist. It's kind of a very exciting moment. And from 95 to 2000, it's just boom town in Silicon Valley. So I was lucky enough to kind of be able to be an investment banker at that time period, which was a crazy job, but the kind of job where you just kind of drink from a fire hose and learn all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And the one smart decision I made, to get back to that point, was in 1999, I got introduced to a guy named Mark Andreessen, and
it's a good guy to know.
Yeah, good guy to know. Yeah, and some of your listeners probably know Mark now, but many people probably didn't know Mark maybe until he entered the political sphere a little bit. But Mark was the founder, or one of the co-founders of Netscape, which was the first internet browser company, and he and another guy, Ben Horowitz, were starting a company called LoudCloud in 1999. And again, all you need to know about LoudCloud was we were basically trying to build what is now Amazon Web Services. Before there was a such thing as Amazon Web Services. We like to say we were cloud before cloud was cool. And we were probably, like a lot of things in business, timing matters. And we were probably 3 to 4 years too early for the business to ultimately be successful first incarnation. We ultimately changed course and created a nice business that we sold later on. But that one meeting that I took in September of 99, quite frankly, is what, got me in this seat today, now almost 30 years later. Because what happened was I got hired at the company that the two of them started. I did a good enough job where at least they felt like, hey, like this is a good, trustworthy and reputable person. And then as a result, they asked me to join them when they started a venture capital firm called Andreessen Horowitz in 2009. Otherwise known as A16Z for those of you who are following along on the podcast. And then for the last 16 and a half years, I had the chance to build alongside them kind of what has now become, I think, one of the preeminent venture capital firms. And the long arc of the story is in about June of 24, Mark and Ben got involved, much more. We'd always been involved politically because we had been doing a bunch of investing in kind of regulated stuff. So we were one of the first crypto investors. Mm-hmm. And back in like 2014 and 15, when we first started doing that, there was nobody in DC talking about crypto basically. And so, I kind of raised my hand. I said, hey, like I'll go start going to DC and do this kind of stuff. And so I was kind of our, kind of de facto government affairs office when we didn't have a government affairs office for the first couple of years. As a result of that, I got involved more in DC and ultimately was the chairman of the National Venture Capital Association, which is basically the lobbying organization for the venture capital industry. So I got kind of my taste of DC at that point in time. And then luckily for us in the firm, we actually then ultimately hired real government affairs people. We now have like a 25-person office here. And, from my perspective, they're some of the best people in the business. But that kind of got me a little bit of the taste of being in DC. And then in summer of 24, when Mark and Ben were kind of figuring out who they were going to endorse for president, they ultimately, spent time with the current president, Donald Trump, and really decided that his policies and what he stood for was kind of really, kind of in the best interest of their interests, which was how do we advance the broad entrepreneurship and tech ecosystem in the country. And so I wrote Mark a note after they went to see the president. He was obviously not yet president at the time. He was former president. And I said, hey, like if this thing turns out to go in the direction, that we think it might, if there's an opportunity, I'd love to throw my hat into the ring basically and see if there's something to do. And so I kind of forgot about that email. And then in September, Mark sent me a note. He's like, hey, remember that email you sent me back in June? He's like, you got to go meet this guy, Howard Lutnick. And Howard, obviously, the current commerce secretary. But at the time in September of 24, Howard was running the pre-election transition team for the president alongside, I think there was a couple other people, but he was certainly the primary person, at least that I was introduced to. And he's like, look, you got to go to New York. You got to go talk to this guy. Yeah.
I think it was him and Linda McMahon.
That's exactly right. Yep. Linda McMahon was also part of it. And somehow, I don't know exactly how they were dividing up their job, but the two of them, you're right, were the two people who were focused on it.
Yeah.
And so I'll never forget, I went to Howard's office and he takes out this massive piece of paper, which if people are watching the video, like probably about as big as the size of this table. And it's got these 4,000 roles on it. And he's like, this is what I have to do. Like, these are the 4,000 jobs that the president has asked me to go fill. And he's like, doing this with his hand. He like puts his finger down this. So he's like, and you should do this one or this one or this one. And he rattled off like 3 or 4 ones for me. Most of them I didn't know what they were, to be completely blunt. Certainly I didn't know what OPM was at the time.
Yeah.
But we had a good meeting and, kind of way led on to way. And at some point in, post-election, I find myself in West Palm Beach. I'm not sure if you and I actually ran into each other there, but that really awesome, kind of low-rise office building.
It was not awesome. It was awful.
Well, it's so funny because
I had to live there.
Well, it's so funny because you'll appreciate this because I don't know much about Florida real estate, but I would go on these trips and, my wife or my friends are like, oh my gosh, you're going to Mar-a-Lago, right? It's got to be amazing. I was like, no, I'm not going to Mar-a-Lago. Like, we're literally going to this like West Palm Beach. And even the best part was one time Sergio called and he's like, can you be here tomorrow or something for some meeting? And so I had no hotel. I ended up getting a hotel. I didn't even know what it was called, but it was one of these like family vacation hotels, basically, where it was really awful. And but it turned out the week I was there was some like senior week or something. So every single person there was over the age of 80.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I called my wife that night. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but she's like thinking I'm sitting in Mar-a-Lago having this great thing. I'm like, no, I've been in this like horrible office building all day long. And then I come back at the end of the day and I go by the pool and there's 80-year-old women doing like water yoga in the pool. Like that's not quite the glamorous life I thought it would be.
And they're like, man, that guy looks really good for 80.
Exactly right. I was like, I was by far the best looking guy there because like I didn't need a walker to get around basically. But anyways, that's how it all kind of came to pass. And look, I've been super lucky and super privileged that I had the opportunity finally to kind of meet the president. I did get to go to Mar-a-Lago the one time I got a chance to interview with the president. And we could talk about that story because that was a fun day also for me. But
okay, yeah, I do want to hear that story then.
So here's the quick story. So I go to Mar-a-Lago, and so the start of the story is Sergio Gore, our friend who you know well, calls me. I live in California, is where I've kind of lived until I moved to DC. So he calls me on a Sunday afternoon, DC time. It's like midday or something in California. It's like, hey, can you get to Mar-a-Lago like at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? I was like, I guess I can. So I'm like, I scrambled to go get it on a red eye. So I get there. It turns out I'm there the day that Masayoshi-san from SoftBank is doing a press conference with the president.
I remember
to announce,
that day.
yeah, you may have been there. He was announcing what was initially, I think, $1 billion investment. The president talked him into making a $2 billion investment on the dais, basically, in the middle of the press conference. So I just literally, get through security. I walk in and I'm at the back of the room and they're like doing this press conference. And I think actually Howard Lutnick, was also there at that time. I can't remember. Anyway, so the press conference breaks and, I'm just kind of standing in this room waiting for someone to greet me and say, okay, like, here's your time to go meet with the president. And in the meantime, Masayoshi-san and his team were hanging out there and like taking pictures of himself at the dais. And he's, as you may know, I'm a little bit of a vertically challenged guy myself, and he's even shorter than I am. So it was like,
you and I are the same height.
It was actually kind of humorous to me to see this happening. So anyways, long story short is like, about an hour or two later, somebody from his office comes out and says, hey, apologies, the president is, delayed. Can you wait? I was like, of course I can wait. I'm not here to do anything else other than
I came here just for this. I'm not going to visit the beach.
I wasn't like looking at my clock, like, if the president can't meet me by this time, I'm out of here. But it turned into 9 o'clock, turned into about like almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon, basically. And it turned out what I learned as I was walking into the president's office was he was trying to negotiate the TikTok deal at that time. Because remember, this was when this was the first deadline, or either the first re-up of the deadline of when TikTok was actually going to shut down. And the president was, kind of trying to, spend time with his team and with the TikTok team to figure out, was there some path forward where they could obviously be true to what the legislative priorities are in the TikTok ban, but also like, not have the service go away for many people. And so it was one of these things where, the day kept going by and by and by. And I finally like, rebooked my flight for the next day and everything. I was like, this is definitely, going to get delayed. But it was a great meeting. It was Sergio was there with me. And then it was the first time I met Susie Wiles. She was in the meeting as well. And we had a lot of fun. It was great. It was a great meeting. Obviously, people, you probably know the president. People who've asked me what the president's like has always, to me, the easiest description I have of the president, he's exactly what you see, basically, which is like the person, right? Yeah, the person I met that day in Mar-a-Lago is exactly the same person you see when he does press conferences, and the same person is like, he says what's on his mind. He's a very great communicator. He likes to jump from different topic to different topic, right? And talk about all kinds of, he's kind of, a man of, many, words in terms of like bridging lots of different really interesting topics. But we had a fun day, and he was kind enough to actually offer me the job at that point in time. So I didn't have to go do one of these agonizing things where I sit on a plane for 6 hours and wonder, how many times did I screw up that interview and like, would I actually get this job? But anyways, it was fun. So that's the long intro to your initial question, which is I made one or two smart decisions along my way. And that's why I'm sitting here talking to you today.
Yeah. What was the, as you were preparing to take over this job, you said when you were first having the conversations with Howard about potential jobs, you didn't know a lot about them. Like what was that prep process like? And what was the thing that most excited you about the job when you took it on? Yeah,
well, it was interesting to me. So when I started, look, my background is, I've been an investor, I've been in the technology industry for a long time. And so at least when I thought about the stuff that I knew, like, I understand organizational stuff, at least I believe I understand organizations very well, having, invested and sat on boards and kind of been part of operating companies for a long time. And then I also, just from a domain perspective, because I had been in the banking industry, I know, a decent amount about capital markets and stuff like that. So I was thinking, okay, like maybe I should do something on the SEC side, or, Howard was like, gee, OMB would be a good place for you, kind of given those skills. And actually, the formative conversation I had was actually not with Howard. It was actually with Katie Miller. So among the many times I went to West Palm, one of my first formal interview rounds that I did actually was a lot of fun. It was literally Katie Miller and Peter Navarro in the same room, neither of whom I had met before.
Yeah. Those are big personalities.
Exactly. Well, it's funny because obviously, I've subsequently come to know both of them, who are both incredibly amazing people. But
they're great.
Yeah, for somebody who, again, like was kind of, as I said, I've been in the private sector my whole life. I was new to this thing. I mean, I certainly knew when I saw Peter, I knew who he was, just because obviously he's been in the news more. I did not know Katie, and obviously, kind of obviously have come to know her and appreciate all the things that, she brings. But the two of them, it was a very funny interview because like within a half a second of starting the interview, Peter goes after me and he's like, how many Chinese nationals are in your companies? And I said, well, I don't know the answer, but I'm sure it's non-zero. And he, kind of was talking to me about, like, doesn't that create security risk? We had this whole like interesting conversation. Then of course we went to tariffs, which was a fun conversation.
Yeah.
And then Katie's like, I've seen a million of you Silicon Valley people. Like, why are you all here? Like, are you really like excited about what the president's doing? And so it was one of these interviews where about halfway through, I was saying this to someone the other day, about halfway through, I was like, it was one of those moments where I'm in the middle of the interview. I'm like, this doesn't seem to be going very well. Like, I may as well just like go for broke basically because, again, as I said, I didn't know the two of them at all. So I had no idea if this was like their normal personalities or they were like really pissed off at me or something. Yeah. So I decided just to kind of be as transparent as possible and, push back where I wanted to push back. And luckily I must have done something right because at the end of the interview, at least, they both gave me, what modicum of positive feedback you can give somebody while they're at the very beginning of an interview cycle. Right. But the reason I bring this up is so since I had met Katie and then, a bunch of people are like, you should really kind of pick her brain as to like what would be an interesting thing to do because she was so intimately involved, obviously, with Sergio and team and everybody else on, how to think about putting the administration roles together. And so she's the first one who told me about OPM. And she's like, you could go do OMB stuff and you could go do SEC stuff. She's like, and those are like really cool, interesting jobs. But she's like, this OPM thing, you should really think about. And I said, it's kind of weird because I had talked, once she said it to me, and then I tried to do some diligence and I talked to a bunch of people who I had known who'd been in government, I'm a prior generation. So people who had been in government in the last like 10 years or so. And to a T, they all told me, do not go to OPM. It's kind of like, the place where like, they kind of put people out to pasture, basically. It's not an exciting place. There's not a lot going on. And so I went back to Katie and I was like, are you like messing with me here? Or are you trying to like put me somewhere like not good? And she's like, no, you're talking to the wrong people. She's like, the people you need to talk to are the current people who are going to be in this administration. And you need to understand the centrality of where talent and human capital and efficiency and all these things are going to be in the administration. And she's like, this is why you should do OPM, because if you want to actually make a difference, like in terms of priorities that are really, really important in this administration, like this is the place where you should go. And the honest answer is like, I took a flyer on it, like not knowing any better, but like she's been, I'm incredibly grateful to her to this day because she was 100% right, which is like my experience so far has been, there's a lot of things obviously that are critical for the president, but like one of the big things we're trying to do is how do we make sure we have the right talent in the right seats so we can do the work of the American people? And then also, how do we think about making efficiency and kind of, being good stewards of financial, taxpayer dollars, a real first-class citizen government? And, the president has been nothing but, kind of gracious in terms of allowing us to kind of advance those initiatives on his behalf.
Yeah. I think between OPM and PPO and a couple other of these places in the administration, there has not been a lot of imagination in previous administrations, and this is the time where we're getting to see the art of the possible. Yeah. And I think a really good example of that, and I think is a really good place to start with your tenure at OPM, is Tech Force, which everybody is talking about. My entire feed, my entire X feed is like
I'm excited. Okay, good.
A Tech Force and how excited everybody is about
working. That's good.
So tell us about Tech Force, what it is, how it came to be, and what you hope it's going to help this administration do.
Yeah. So look, I'm super excited about Tech Force, and I'm very, very confident that we're going to make a difference with it. So let me give you a little bit of the why, first of all, like why are we even doing this? So there's really kind of a couple things we're trying to solve with Tech Force. Number one, you and I were talking about this before we went on air. We have a serious like age demographic challenge in government today. So, just to refresh your listeners' memories, about 7% of the federal workforce is under the age of 30 today. And if you look outside the federal workforce at the broad US workforce, that number is about 22, 23%. So you factor that in, you're like, okay, by a factor of 3 to 1, basically, we are under indexed in terms of early career people, is the euphemism at least we're using instead of saying under 30. On the other end, we have, a lot of people who are kind of close to retirement age. So about 44% of our workforce is over the age of 50. And so you can imagine if we do nothing else, just over the next 5, 10, 15 years, you've got an enormous bolus of people who will be retiring, understandably, from the federal government. And we're doing nothing to kind of, replace, that pipeline on the front end. Now, you and I are probably both simpatico in the sense that like we both would like smaller government, but I think we need something other than no government. And so like we are, potentially at risk of being in a situation where we actually may not even have the right number of people to even service the American people on the things that we all think are important, to be part of government. So that's kind of thing number one we're trying to solve is, can we like balance out this age demographic problem?
Mm-hmm.
Number two is, if you think about one of the other big priorities of this administration is, how do we modernize the infrastructure in government to better serve the American people, but also, quite frankly, not bankrupt all of our kids and grandkids in the process? And, my personal view is like a huge part of that will be, how do we use technology in a smart way that allows us to not think of the solution to every problem is just hire more headcount, but the solution is, okay, can we work smarter? Can we work more efficiently? And technology is not going to displace everyone's jobs, but can technology be an accelerant, be a productivity enhancement, so that as the needs of the government grow, we don't find every time the needs grow, like we linearly have to add more headcount, but we can get more scale and more efficiency in the organization.
Right.
And so when you put those two together, like what we're missing then we got a skills gap perspective, which is we're missing people who have modern software development, modern data science, modern product management, modern cybersecurity, all the new stuff that's happening in the technology industry that could dramatically increase the productivity and efficiency and our ability to deliver for the American people. So TechForce is trying to basically solve both those problems. The third thing I would say TechForce is trying to solve, which to me is probably the most exciting thing that I'm trying to do, is how do we change the culture of what it means to work for the government? So my guess is, if you go to any random college campus today, and you probably do this in your day job, so you could probably tell me if I'm wrong, like, I think we have a messaging problem in government is what I would describe, a marketing and a messaging problem, which is, I don't think government is top of mind for people who are graduating from, universities, community colleges, trade schools as a place to start and have a really interesting career. And I think that's because the messaging is wrong from my perspective. So I'll give you a quick story. When I first did my first all hands meeting, when I started at OPM, one of the managers came up to me afterwards and she's like, "You guys are ruining things for us." I was like, "Wow, that's an interesting way to meet somebody on my team for the first time." I said, "Well, tell me more. What do you mean by that?" And I said, "First of all, what do you mean by you guys?" And she's like, "Well, you Doge guys." I was like, "Okay, look, I'm not a Doge guy, but okay, like I understand what you mean by that." And I said, "Well, what do you mean we're ruining things?" And she said, "Well, our value proposition to people coming to government has been, come to government because you have permanent lifetime employment." And I said, "Okay, I don't think you're going to like me anymore after I give you my response to your comment."
Yeah, you're going to hate me more.
Exactly.
Actually.
I was like, so first of all, I said, that's just not true. And I'm sorry if people have been telling you that. Like, there's no such thing as permanent employment. Like, and nobody deserves that, and nobody should. Like, everybody needs to come to work and obviously earn the right to continue to do their job in the way that's appropriate for the American people. And, look, maybe we have created a perception of, permanency, but that's not, I don't think anyone ever intended that. And I said, by the way, like, the second thing you're not going to like me to hear is, like, that's a terrible marketing message, right? So if I'm going to go to a 20-year-old or a 22-year-old or a 25-year-old, like, they're not interested in joining the government because they have permanency of career. They're interested because they're surrounded by smart people. They're going to learn new things, right? They're going to develop new skills. They're going to be rewarded for the work they're doing, like all the things that, that people join organizations for. So it's like, so when I put all this together, like, to me, part of what TechForce is we need to change the narrative and help people understand we're not asking you to make a lifetime commitment. I'm asking you to, like, say, spend 2 years of your life, do some awesome work, learn some great things. What's the onus is on us to demonstrate that work you do and that development you get then is translatable into, if you want to stay in government, great, God bless you. Like, let's find you a government job. If you want to go to the private sector, we should do the same thing. And so, as you probably know, with TechForce, we've partnered with about 30 of the largest technology companies where, in addition to helping us, like, kind of run this program, they will also create a job fair for all these people at the end of those 2 years so that, if they do great work and they're smart people, like, they should go get a job at OpenAI or a Databricks or a Snowflake or, any of these kind of, companies that are, important companies in the technology space. And so that, to me, is kind of the scintilla of what I really want to accomplish here is, if we can change the narrative and convince people why government service is not only great, but also, like, valuable and additive to their career, I would much rather us see, extend this across all kinds of different jobs, not just tech jobs, but, financial analyst jobs, project management jobs, HR jobs, any cross-section of jobs where the government has massive demand for it. And we go try to attract people who are earlier in their career, who are, like, super aggressive and learning and developing and growing their own professional aspirations. And then, quite frankly, let's let the government compete with the private sector for the, smartest and best minds, but, like, do it on an equal footing. Whereas today, again, I just think we're missing kind of tapping into that part of the, that expertise.
Yeah. And my understanding is that most of these guys are going to be, I mean, you invented the program, so tell me if I'm wrong, going to be going to the CIOs, right?
That's correct, right?
Okay.
So the other thing we want to do that's different, I think, from other programs is, when I talk to a bunch of folks about this, they're like, look, there's a bunch of these kind of what I call internship type programs. The problem with them is we drop onesies, twosies into these massively large organizations and they just get swallowed up basically, right? And so look, you probably have some experience with this, as you guys are placing people, luckily you're placing them at least into kind of the political realm where there's a smaller number of people and, these offices of directors are, much smaller than dropping them into like a CIO organization.
Yeah.
So we're trying to replicate that experience. So so basically the way it's going to work is, for example, I was just on a panel this morning with the CIO of Department of Transportation. And on the panel, he's like, I need 60 engineers yesterday, basically. And so I was like, great. What I want to do is I want to drop you 60 awesome engineers. And then what we're going to do is we're going to ask the private sector to drop us 3 or 5 engineering managers who are current employees of these technology companies who are going to take time out from their job and basically manage these teams so that I can give, the Department of Transportation CIO a fully functional team of engineers and engineering managers.
Wow.
And then have them, they don't necessarily literally need to report into him if he doesn't want to, but like they need to report into someone senior in the organization where we don't then like disintegrate them and like send them out into all these different like facets of the CIO organization, but we keep them together. We work them on projects that are consistent and that, coalesce their skills around some deliverables.
Yeah.
And then the other thing we're going to do is then, at scale, we'll have people at DOT and HHS and IRS and SSA and all the various agencies because we've been lucky enough to get like tremendous partnership across all the agencies. We're going to run like, a programmatic part of it as well, which is so on nights and weekends, all 1,000 of those people will come together and we'll have, Satya Nadella from Microsoft do a talk, or we'll have, Sam Altman from OpenAI do a talk for them. So give them exposure to things they wouldn't otherwise get, to talk about career development opportunities, to talk about like what's life like in the technology world. And make them feel like they are like truly like part of a whole so that they don't get lost in this massive behemoth that is the government.
No, yeah. Actually, some folks on your team have been asking us if we want to do one.
Great. Let's do
one of them. So
we'd love to have you. That'd be awesome. Yeah. We're open to anything. Like the whole idea in my mind is like, let's get people as much exposure as they can. Let's hear a bunch of different voices. Like it'd be great to hear from people like you who are like DC insiders. And then for people who are completely outside the Beltway, just anything that helps them like think about, okay, like what do I want to do with the rest of my life? Like it's a perfect opportunity for us to give this to them.
And I think a part of this too that's really interesting. I was actually rolling out this thesis to somebody at OMB I was having a conversation with earlier today, that there is a certain sense in which like the aesthetics of a lot of these government websites, the databases, like all of that stuff, that you can conduct statecraft through the way that you do that. Like it is maybe this is a Joe Gabby a bit, but
it's true.
But this person I was talking to at OMB was talking about how like the top 5 websites used in the government, it's like the Social Security stuff, food stamps, all of that, things that people have to interact
Medicare,
with
IRS,
regularly. And the way that people are going to feel about the government that they, are currently subject to is really subject to competency, right? Like,
I think that's right.
Does this look easy on the eyes? Does it work? Does it do exactly what I need it to do? And it sounds like Tech Force is essentially going to do that to all of these different departments. And
I think that's right.
With people.
Yeah, you can kind of think of, so I think of us as like, we're very symbiotic with what Joe is doing. And Joe has been a great friend of ours over at OPM. As you probably know, he's been working on the retirement services application, which also was a disaster, or I shouldn't say disaster. It didn't exist basically until we had people like him really come in. But I think you're right. The way I think about it is, look, like there's kind of all the plumbing software infrastructure that has to get rebuilt because they're just, on outdated systems. We're not utilizing modern AI and stuff like that. Like, so there's all that stuff. I hope a lot of what the Tech Force teams will be able to do is do that. We need software developers, we need data scientists, we need architects, we need product managers, stuff like that. And then I kind of think about as like what Joe is doing with Natural Design Studio is like, you're exactly right. It's the fit and finish. It's the UI. It's all the layers that go on top of that. And you're exactly right when you think about it from a statecraft perspective, which is like, why shouldn't every person who interacts with the IRS have as good of an experience as they do when they interact with Airbnb in Joe's case, or Uber or others? Like these should be, these are like massive consumer applications. And, it's a great opportunity for us to showcase that the government is actually working for you. And look, it's just like when you walk into a house, right? If the house is dilapidated, like you form an impression immediately and you're like, wow, like this is not a house I want to buy. It's why like, realtors love for you to like, put a fresh coat of paint on and all this other stuff you do when you're selling your house. And it's the same thing here, which is like when somebody is interacting with the government, whether they're interacting in person or they're interacting electronically, which increasingly, I suspect people will be doing electronically, like it should be our best work. And it should be like, it inspires confidence in the government because I go to, a Social Security or an IRS website and I'm like, wow, like this looks just like all the great applications that I use in my day-to-day life, and it just happens to be like the government. So that's, I think, as Joe thinks about it, he's like, why shouldn't the American people like be entitled to the same level of, kind of technological, beautification or whatever the right word is, like just like everybody else does in their day life?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I love that. I haven't had the chance to meet Joe, but we are huge fans.
We can probably help you with that. Happy to do that. Joe's a great guy.
Great. We can have him expound on this exact topic for an hour.
Exactly. Yes. He'll do it much more eloquently than I am.
But yeah, like not everybody in the country has to use Airbnb. Everybody has to interact with the IRS.
Exactly.
Like, we might as well make it a somewhat pleasant experience to the extent we can.
And it's just, and look, I mean, aside from the aesthetics, to be completely blunt, like, look, it'll just be a better experience, right? So the more things that if people go to the application and it's obvious how to use it, how to get things they want, then that means fewer people have to go sit on wait on a call center. And I get this. I run a call center for our retirement services, and it's just not a good experience, right? Nobody likes it. Nobody likes to sit in a phone queue, basically, and do that. And so the more you can put the tools in the hands of the people, the aesthetics of it will actually drive the kind of behavior you want. So it'll not just be beautiful, but it'll be a better experience for everybody, and it'll be more efficient, and people will actually say, wow, like, I can't believe this is how I interact with my government.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Something else that you guys have been in the news for recently has been Schedule F is back on the table. We may get up to 50,000 of these career employees rescheduled. For people who have been living under a rock when it comes to employment law in the federal government in the last 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
What is Schedule F, and what are you guys hoping to accomplish on it in this administration?
Yeah, so Schedule F is now the artist formerly known as Schedule F because it's Schedule Policy Career, right? So the good news is, in addition to all the work that Joe Gabby has done, is we are rebranding and changing the name to more accurately reflect what it actually is. So what are we talking about here? So look, you all know that, this, and your listeners probably understand it. The president ultimately is the executive, obviously, of the executive branch. That's why we call it the executive branch, which is this like morass of like tons of different agencies, some of which like obviously the IRS and others, and some of which are these small organizations that probably nobody's ever heard of. But you've got like literally 2 million people basically in this apparatus of working in the executive branch. And you can imagine, in any organization, what you need a president or a CEO who basically says, okay, these are the goals and the objectives of this administration, which the president has very clearly laid out. But the president can't affect those on his own, right? He needs the leaders of those organizations to ultimately take his objectives and translate them into, okay, like, how do we actually do this stuff?
Yep.
And there's a small stint of people like me, right, who are the 4,000 people who PPO and the political folks appoint. But then there is this whole cadre of senior managers in the, who are career employees who are as important as people like me, because they are the ones who are actually affecting the policy and making sure the policy happens, right? And so what Schedule Policy Career is intended to do is to say, look, if you are in one of those roles, and you mentioned that it could be up to 50,000. So the process, as we were talking, is all the agencies will submit their kind of roles that they think are appropriate, and then the president and his team at the White House will ultimately determine which of those 50,000 will be designated as policy career people. The idea is, if you're in policy career, and you decide that, hey, like, maybe I don't like the president, what he's doing, and which is totally fine, obviously, for you not to like it. The question is, does that then translate into your unwillingness to actually deliver on the objectives that the president has for the administration? And if you do that, then the answer is, like, you can't be in that role. It's not appropriate for you to be in a very senior policymaking role in government where you just kind of decide, hey, like, my personal predilections are to do X when the president wants me to do Y. And therefore, I'm going to tell my people not to do that, or I'm going to basically, kind of impact the ability of that agency to be able to kind of accomplish the goals. And so that's really what policy career does. And, look, in my mind, like, to me, this is exactly what should happen in organizations. And it is what happens in any other organization, which is at some point in time, there is a leader of the organization. And it happens to be, as you well know, like, the president is the only person actually democratically elected in the entire executive branch. And so the American people said to the president, like 77 million of them is, okay, like, we actually want to see the policies affected that you told us we were going to affect. And so to have some person who is not democratically elected and unaccountable to the public say, you know what, I disagree with those 77 million people, I'm not going to do it, despite the fact that it's a lawful order and it's, consistent with what the president said. To me, like, that just doesn't make sense in any organization. And so what policy career does is enable us to make sure we have a system that allows that, so that this president, or quite frankly, if a different president comes in the future and decides they want to do this as well, then they're entitled to the same thing, which is they're entitled to set the rules of the road and set the objectives. And they're entitled to have an executive branch that ultimately, is able to affect the policies that they think are the most important ones.
Yeah. And I want to dispel some misinformation about this too. Like the case that the left has always made about Schedule Policy Career, formerly known as Schedule
Yes.
F, was that all of these people are going to be, reallocated to this schedule, and then the president's just going to fire them all.
Right.
And that is not what this is actually about. It is holding senior policymaking employees to account to actually doing what the chief executive says.
You're totally right. Look, this is 100% about accountability. In fact, if you actually, for the people who say that, if they actually read the rule, which by the way is 250 pages and had 40,000 public comments, that, this is a topic for another discussion, which is like how insanely mind-numbing and inefficient the process of rulemaking is, which someday we can tackle. If you actually read the rule, what you'll see is like we explicitly said, number one is like this is not to be used for like restructurings or rifts. This is not to take away whistleblower protections from people. This is not to enable you to fire somebody for their political proclivities. Like I can't fire somebody because, they're a Democrat and I'm a Republican. This is specifically if they are in a position where they're like, you know what, like despite what the president or the head of my agency says, I'm not going to do that. Like that's a dereliction of duty. And that's what we're addressing here. So it's 100%, as you said, it's about accountability. And again, as I said, like, this is perfectly reasonable in any organization. Like it'd be one thing if the government was small and the president could just hire 4,000 people like me and like we just unilaterally carry out everything he's doing. But like that's just not possible. We have 2 million plus people in this organization. And so the people who are in a position to lead and manage and direct organizations and determine where they spend their time and their resources and how they make policies, like those people ultimately need to be accountable to the electorate. And that's the American people.
Yeah. I know you haven't gotten the responses back from most of the departments and agencies yet, but what I'm super familiar with, like the seniority structure for politicals. I am not really familiar with it at all for careers. What I know you're saying that they are, more policy making positions, but like what sort of like job titles or where are they in the seniority ranks in
so these are going to be for the most part, number one, probably very senior people. So if you know the way the civil service system works, the most senior role is what's called an SES, Senior Executive Service, I think is what it stands for. And those are like the most senior people. There's about 7,500 of those across government. And they're like, that's the highest echelon you can reach. And then there's SL just below that senior level. And then there's kind of the GS scale, right? Starting from the most top, GS 15 would be the most senior and then down. So I don't know. I haven't seen all the submissions, so I don't know exactly where they'll be, but certainly more of the positions will be those like GS-15s, SLs and SESs, because those are people who are managing 1,000-person organizations who are in a position where the work they're doing actually is directly related and is, kind of the effect of policies that come out of the White House. And so that's where it'll be targeted. So, people don't need to worry. Look, if you're in an individual contributor role or you're not in a position where you're actually making policy, you're just in a position where it's like, hey, like, my manager obviously tells me the things that I need to do and I do them. Like you're probably fine. All those people have all the same civil service protections that they have yesterday, even in the presence of this new schedule policy career.
Well, and even if you do get rescheduled, it's like you only have to worry if you're a bad apple.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Getting rescheduled does not mean like, you get fired. What it means is, okay, like if you decide that you are going to try to thwart the objectives of this administration and do things that are, kind of literally, antagonistic to what the objectives of the organization are, then yes, all it does, it says you can be removed from office without going through the whole litany of civil service like firing protections that we have for everybody else in the system. But you're exactly right. Like getting retitled to this does nothing other than say, quite frankly, what it says is you're an important policymaking role. And it says like you are, ultimately an agent of that executive agency, and your job is to carry out the lawful objectives of that agency. It's like it's not that controversial.
Yeah,
I get it.
Please just do your job.
Right, I get it. Right, I get it. Why it's being spun differently because people are worried. Well, again, if I'm an R and you're a D, like this is a perfect opportunity for me to fire you. But like, no, you can't do that. The only way you can be removed from your job is if you're doing things that literally are, detrimental to the well-functioning of government. And the way government works is, look, the executive who's duly elected by the people gets 4 years to determine what are the key priorities that, he or she wants to carry out. Like that's totally reasonable.
Yeah. Moving to the other end of the seniority structure for careers. Going back to this number that you were talking about earlier where, 7% of the federal government workforce is under the age of 30 versus 22% in the private sector. What, aside from tech force, what are you considering to bring in, like you were asking me about on college campuses, like what I'm seeing. And it's funny, like when I talk to guys, the extent to which they want to work, I talk to a lot of guys who want to work in a political role. But if you ask, like, well, what about a career role, or something like that, they usually only want to if you get to carry a gun or go to a foreign country.
Well, there's a lot of jobs for which that's true. So,
there's a fair amount. But what are you doing aside from tech force to attract young people?
So I think there's two sides of the equation that we have to deal with here. So one is, and tech force is an illustration of this, is we've got to actually go find people, meet people where they are, and figure out what is motivating them, and figure out, does the government actually meet those motivations? So look, the good news is we now know, what you've told me is, okay, gun toting and or international, good, check mark on those things. Yeah. What I need to now convince people is that's great, but by the way, there are 90% of the other jobs in government where you can actually affect change at a real meaningful scale. You can learn really important stuff. You can work with really smart people. You can do cool things. And oh, by the way, as I said, I'm not asking you to commit to a lifetime of federal service, just commit to a limited period of time to do that. So for me, number one is we got to go do the marketing. We got to go message to people. We got to listen to what they're telling us. And then we got to figure out, are the jobs that we need, which I believe, commensurate with those. But we got to go tell the story. And so that means literally we need to go on college campuses, and we need to be there, not, kind of in May when everyone's already been picked over and got their permanent job. We got to be there in, September of the prior year. And we have to do internship programs that aren't BS internship programs where they don't actually have the potential to lead to full-time stuff. So my middle daughter worked in government one summer, and the first thing she was told by her boss, she was in college at the time, was just so you know, there is no internship to job offer potential here. And I was like, that's the craziest thing in the world. Every good employer knows, this is the perfect opportunity. Go find people, get a chance to know who they are a hell of a lot better than you would in an interview process. And if they're good, then great. We should make a permanent role for them. So we've got to do, there's little foot faults that we do that are just dumb and stupid. We have to fix, right? So number one is that's the front end. That's how we build pipeline and get people excited. The second thing we have to do is, when they come into government, it has to be the opportunity that we said it was. And so to me, this is where the merit hiring principles that the president has put out, a lot of the performance management changes that we're making have to happen, which is, and to me, what that means is we have to have a high performance culture in government. So if we're going to attract young people, at least what I believe is they want to come into an environment where they can do great work. They're surrounded by really smart people. If they do well, they can actually be promoted, be recognized. Today, we have a system where everything is tenure based, right? So you may knock the ball, cover off the ball and do an awesome job in your first 6 months here. But you know what? I literally cannot promote you because today there is a regulation which says, if you haven't been in your job for 12 months, I can't promote you. And oh, by the way, if I promote you, you then have to sit on the sideline for another 12 months because I'm not legally allowed to promote you again. But that's not how the world works. Some people are just faster learner than others, and some people should progress through the organization better. So the other big thing that we're doing is we're going to eliminate all degree and all tenure-based requirements for jobs in the federal government. So in my mind, those are, you were asking me the question when we were offline, does everybody need to go to college? Look, the answer probably is no. Everybody doesn't need to go to a 4-year college. Some people may need no college. Some people might need 2 years of a trade school or a community college. We can talk more about that. But we have a structural system today where the vast majority of jobs say, ye must have a college degree for this job. Well, if I'm applying for an engineering job and I have a college degree in Russian literature, is that really actually a relevant skill determination for whether I can do a, software engineering job? Of course it's not. It's stupid. But we use these proxies and we use tenure. We say, if you haven't been here for 10 years, you cannot be a GS-14. The strictures say that that's the way it should be. And that's just, I don't think that works. And so that's what I mean is we have to create, not only do the marketing and the funnel creation, but then when they get here, we have to be true to our word that this is the kind of environment that you would want to be in because it recognizes hard work, it recognizes skill, and it doesn't create artificial barriers so that if you're not here for 40 years, you have no chance of ever actually escalating through the system.
Yeah, it's not that, post-secondary education is bad or whatever. No. It's just that a degree does not confer competence.
I think that's right. Yeah. And we know that, by the way, everyone knows this intuitively, but you also know there's all this, you've probably seen this. There's all these great studies about what's called the sheepskin effect. Have you seen these?
No.
It's very cool. Actually, go Google it when you get home. For all your listeners, go Google sheepskin effect. The sheepskin, of course, referring to literally the paper that, often diplomas are written on, or at least historically. Maybe I don't know if they still write them on sheepskin, but at least, today it's
pretty sure they just print them now.
Yes, exactly. Paper. But the sheepskin effect shows there's all these studies, which is if you go to school for, 3.5 years and then drop out, kind of in your last semester versus people who stay for that last semester and get their degree, that person who stays for the last semester actually has a better career trajectory on average than does the person who dropped out. Which if schools were actually if they were actually educational, that would make no sense because as a 3.5 year person, you would have whatever that math is. I'm going to destroy the math. 85 to 90% of the knowledge you would have gleaned at that point in time. So you should have 85 to 90% in theory of the outcomes that these people have. But there's a very, very big gap there. And what the sheepskin effect is, it says, look, all this is these are just credentialing and proxy things, right? The reason those people are in theory smarter than the person who dropped out is because they have this piece of paper that then Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and McKinsey and anybody else uses as a proxy for skill set. And we look askance at the person who went for 3.5 years, even though if they were actually teaching you educational experience, you can't tell me the educational learning from somebody who went from 3.5 years to 4 years is actually dramatically different between the two of those people. And again, that's to me, these are all the things that we just have to avoid that stuff. Again, and to your point, it's not that there's a lot of things for which a college degree makes sense. If you look, if you want to be a doctor, there's some amount of actual learning you probably need to do in terms of textbook stuff. But a college degree in itself, as a proxy for skill doesn't make any sense because that assumes that all college degrees are equal, right? And we know that what you studied matters and where you studied matters and stuff like that. And so we got to avoid all these shorthands that people use. And instead, what the whole merit hiring plan is the president has put out that we've codified through regulation is let's stop doing that and let's actually use things that are actually demonstrative of your skills that you need for this job. And if you have the skills, I don't care if you're 19 years old or if you're 50 years old, if you have the skills, if both those people are equally performant at the job, quite frankly, we should hire both of them and they should be compensated at the same level. We shouldn't have some arbitrary either degree or tenure barrier that causes, discrimination in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of feels like we've moved away from this over the last couple of years. But I remember when I first dropped out of college, it was you needed it basically felt like a barrier to entry to any white collar career, period. So if you wanted to be an executive assistant or a secretary or something like that, it would require a college degree. And it's all you need to do is be organized, on top of it, and know how to send emails. That's the job. Do you really need a 4-year degree for that?
Yeah.
No.
Well, there's still, by the way, you probably know this, but look, there are still plenty of jobs where, you need some kind of post, you need a graduate degree, right? So there's a lot of places who won't hire you into a senior business role if you don't have an MBA. And again, I teach at the graduate school of business at Stanford at the business school. I guarantee you, there's not a lot of education going on there. There's not a lot of learning happening in business school. So the fact that could be a prerequisite for you to get the next level job in a business organization to me, is again, another example that all these things are proxies and credentials that are kind of lazy shorthands that we use to evaluate people's skills instead of actually doing the hard work of yes, are you responsible and can you do the functional things that the job requires? That's what we should be testing for.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And it's so cool to hear a Trump administration official say this out loud because there are a lot of people who really wanted this, me included, when he first became president, I couldn't afford to finish school. And it was you were kind of screwed in terms of getting into a white collar career. So I think there are millions of people that are going to be really excited about this.
I hope so. Yeah.
Moving on toward the civil service more broadly, we all know what it was like under the Biden era. As an example, we know the career obstruction that existed in the president's first term. We were talking about this earlier, you're executing the art of the possible at OPM. What is the most ideal version for you when you come out of this job at the end of this administration for what the civil service looks like?
Yeah. So I was saying this to somebody the other day, look, in a perfect world, we would codify in legislation a lot of things that you and I are talking about. You probably are more adept at this than I am. I don't put a lot of bets on us getting legislation on most things these days. I mean, Lord knows we can't even figure out how to get a budget, right? So it's pretty hard to assume we're going to get substantive legislation. So a lot of what we're doing two things, right? One is like a lot of what we're doing is through formal regulatory process, right? Through the rulemaking process, which is good. But the problem, of course, as you well know, is look, if a new administration were to come in, 3 years from now, somebody could, via EO or otherwise, obviously repeal a lot of those regulations. So the thing that's enduring that I hope we do is we have to make cultural change in the organization. And what I mean by that, I know that sounds kind of like motherhood apple pie when I say it, but like what it really means is the things that I care about is, can we make a dent in this early career problem? Because number one, I think, like, as I said, it's demographically important. I think it's skill-based important, but also it'll be culturally important, because if we can start to get like people who are earlier in their careers, they just think differently. And this is, as someone who's in the over 50 category, this is not an ageist comment, but look, people think differently at different stages of their life. People have greater risk tolerance at different stages of their life. And so if we can do a better job of balancing out kind of the number of people that we have who are early career, I think that will affect a important cultural change in the federal government, because you'll have, number one, I think more experimentation, more willingness to take some amount of risk, not crazy risk like the world I come from in venture capital, but like reasonable risks. We'll do much more innovative work. We'll think differently. And oh, by the way, as I said, I think people who are at that stage of their career, they drive the culture of the organization because they want to be in a place that is performance-based. They want to be in a place where there aren't artificial barriers to their promotions. They want to be in a place where they're surrounded by smart people, where they're learning, where they feel like somebody actually cares about their career development. And so to me, like, that's the most lasting thing we can do, which is if we can bring this, caliber of individual in who's kind of, at a different stage in their career development, they will help, I think, drive the kinds of performance management changes, merit hiring changes that we will do and we are doing kind of by virtue of regulation. But for them to be permanent, I think they have to be driven by the actual people who are inside the organization. So that's my hope. My hope is, like, very simply, look, when I'm, not in this role in, 3+ years from now, I would like, hopefully, every smart person who comes out of high school, whether they decide to go to college or not, to say, wow, like, the federal government is a place where not only can I like actually do some good service for my country, but I can learn, I can advance my career, and I'm creating optionality, because like when I finish a couple of years in government, I'm going to either have, like, the world's going to be my oyster. I can go do this awesome public service job if I want to do for the rest of my life, or like the private sector is going to be clamoring for my expertise. Like if we did that, like none of this other stuff matters, because that becomes to me a self-correcting mechanism for the kinds of kind of behavior and culture and people that I think we want to service the American people.
Yeah, there is actually a sense in which, like, doing a couple-year stint in government is in and of itself a great credential. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is, maybe pie in the sky, and this is not anything against any of these wonderful companies, but like if the federal government, in my mind, could become the 2-year analyst program that is the McKinsey program, the BCG program, the Goldman Sachs program, like, I think the federal government should aspire to be that program, and then those people can go to McKinsey and BCG if they want to do that, or they can go to a private company. Like, that to me would be great. Like if it felt like everybody coming out of college, so number one, I just think like the world would be a better place. Like if everybody said like, wow, I have such a strong sense of like desire to do something good for my country that's public service oriented, and I don't have to give up whatever dreams I might have of, professional success in the private sector or compensation or other stuff like that. Like, because we can't solve the like micro compensation problem. Like the government, at least, unless and until we decide that like the government's a different thing than it is today, like we're never going to pay people what they can make in the private sector.
Sure.
And that's fine. And so we don't need to tackle that problem. But what we need to do is demonstrate that the government is a training ground and a proving ground for awesome talent. And then that talent basically can write their ticket to wherever they want to go. And so like, if we did that, man, I think this would be a great place for, our kids and grandkids.
Yeah. And I think there's, going back to the bit where we were talking about how you market this to young people, like at the end of the day, there's a reason why careers are called public servants. Yeah. Right. Like it is an act of public service.
It is.
Working in government.
It is. And it's a very noble thing. So I don't want to take anything away from that, but I think it's just wrong for us to assume that we're going to go to a 22-year-old and say like, come here because you could have guaranteed employment for 35 or 40 years. Like that
it's totally upside down.
That's just upside down. Right. Yeah. Like, so as I said, we got to meet people where they are, and that's not where people are.
Yeah. So you do this great newsletter that I love. I think it's awesome. I wish more leaders of these agencies and departments in the administration would do this. It is called the Secrets of OPM.
Yes.
Newsletter.
Do you know the derivation of that, Secrets of OPM? Do you know where that name comes from?
No.
Oh my gosh! Wow, this is really exciting. We're breaking news here today. So I was in the venture capital business I mentioned. So I wrote a book called The Secrets of Sand Hill Road.
Okay.
So Sand Hill Road, if you've ever been out to California, is the road where all the venture capital firms are. So it's kind of like the place where literally all the money sits. And so I wrote this book it's basically a book about how the venture capital industry works. And so when I came here, the whole theory in writing that was I wanted to kind of like democratize the understanding of the venture capital world, because it's kind of one of these weird, like opaque things that no one really understands. And as a result, I think like we could have more entrepreneurs if more people understood, if we peeled back the envelope and it weren't such a black box for people. So I wanted to bring, the reason I called it then Secrets of OPM is, to me, it's the same thing, which is I think part of the challenge we have in government, and this is kind of goes, why do I did this, is like, we don't actually tell people what's going on. Like all people see is whatever, a 30-second news snippet on, either Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, whatever their, poison of choice is basically. And that's how they form their opinions. And so, and my personal view, just having spent a lot of time in kind of trying to tell stories in the public sphere, is having a direct channel is really, really important. It's obviously what you're doing here with this podcast, right? So I'm sure you talk to the traditional media too at various points in time, and you get your 30-second, clip on stuff. But as you well know, like that doesn't allow you to actually tell the story you want to tell, because everything's so sanitized and everything has to fit into some like really great, like, quotation that makes the paper. So for me, like the reason to do the Secrets of OPM, which by the way, you can get on Substack now too. You can go to the OPM website and get it, or you can also get it on Substack, or you can follow me on X, of course, and get it there. Is exactly that, which is like, we need to tell our story directly to the American people. So I'm under no illusion that everyone's going to be like, wow, like everything you say is great and I love it and it's perfect. But like, this is my opportunity in a slightly longer form to say, this is why we're doing Scheduled Policy Career, and this is what it means, or this is why we think the amount of union time union money that gets spent on taxpayer dollars is like not a good use of resources, or other things like that. Like I can't tell that story with enough nuance in a way without actually, giving me an opportunity to write it down. And yeah, like some people will say, great, like who cares? You're just talking your book. That's all that matters. But like to me, like that's the way people communicate. We were talking about, you mentioned, Joe Rogan when we were kind of, talking before this. Like it's really interesting to me what we've seen in the media, which is people have gone to kind of either like very short form or very long form, right? And absolutely everybody can't do 3 hours like Joe Rogan, but like it's very interesting that like there is a huge segment of the population that actually wants greater depth of understanding of things. And I'm sure it's the listeners who listen to your podcast here, right? You're doing a 45-minute podcast. Like that's a real time investment for people. Although you can't listen to these things on double speed, of course. Yeah. But
I don't do that. I always think it's freaky when people do that. I don't like hearing it.
So so what I found is it depends on who the speakers are. So maybe for someone like me, I generally talk quickly. Mark Andreessen, who I worked with many years, like talks really quickly. So I can't listen to Mark on double speed. But 1.5, you can kind of do sometimes, which helps. Yeah. But anyways, my point is just there is actually a big audience who wants depth of understanding. Mm-hmm. And then there's some people who are just going to like take their 30-second, hit from, X or whatever, and that's fine. But I just think you have to have a direct channel, because look, this as well as I, like, and this is not a hit on mainstream media, because, some of my best friends are in mainstream media, but like, we know every story that shows up in a newspaper, every story that shows up on a nightly newscast is there for a particular reason, right? It is advancing some narrative. And in that case, it's the narrative that whoever is the editor of that show or whoever the reporter is. And look, that's their job. Like that's what they do. They cater to their audience. So the only way that I think personally we have the ability to tell the narrative that we want to tell is for us to go directly to the consumer and say, look, I'm laying it all out there for you. Disagree with me, yell at me. And by the way, I get a million, hate comments in my X feed, but like, I'd much rather do that. I'd much rather have people read it and tell me they hate me than actually like have people not actually, understand what we're trying to do.
Yeah. No, I think that totally makes sense. Beyond the Substack, and by the way, when it was called Secrets of OPM, I was just like, these are the secrets of OPM.
Right,
like,
exactly.
Here they are, up in the public sphere.
Yeah. In all seriousness, by the way, this president has been very clear that transparency is really important. And look, I just think like it's incumbent upon us to do that, because look, what I found in life is if you don't give people a narrative, they will make up their own narrative. And most people go to very dark places in the narrative, right? So, they see something and they're like, oh my God, this is terrible, this is horrible. And look, maybe the answer is it is terrible and it's horrible, but at least if you like help them understand your way of thinking, at least you can try to have a more rational conversation about like, do I disagree or not agree with it, as opposed to people immediately going to their corners and saying like, this must be bad because President Trump did it, and therefore I don't like President Trump, but I did it. Or this must be great because my favorite Democratic politician did it. Like, there's a lot more nuance in the world. And, I hope that things like blogs and podcasts obviously allow people to engage in that nuance.
Totally. Where else can, aside from the Substack, you referenced your X handle.
Yes, go to X. SKUPOR is the best place to go. You can get me there. There's also an OPM one. I forget what the handle is. It's probably US OPM, but I think that's right. But you can also go there. But yeah, like those are the best places. And then look, I'm gracious for people like you who give me an opportunity to talk to different audiences, particularly on podcasts, which is always a fun thing to do.
Yeah, no, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on Moment of Truth.
Yeah, I appreciate the time. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to yet another fantastic episode of Moment of Truth. And thank you to Director of OPM, Scott Kupor, for making the time to be able to do this, to come down to our rinky-dink little operation here and come on this podcast that we've been doing for 5 years now, which feels absolutely insane. But it was a fantastic way to celebrate 5 years of podcasting. And I certainly learned a lot about the way the career bureaucracy works and what he's doing to improve it. So we were super excited to do all that. Fantastic episode. Thank you for tuning in to Moment of Truth, and we will see you again next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier and Hunter Smith, with original graphics and title cards by Jared Cummings. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.